In tonight's Dorchester segment, we take a look at what's behind the numbers from Tuesday's election and the beginnings of a showdown between finalists for mayor. To fill us in is the executive editor and publisher of the Dorchester Reporter, Bill Forry. Thank you very much for being with us, Bill.
You bet, Chris. Good to see you.
Bill, I know we've been through some nights that are low on sleep as well as numbers, but you've been ahead of many of us here in Boston because you have some certain precincts where you looked at numbers, and I know most of them are in Dorchester, but what did you find striking about them?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, we deployed reporters and other people affiliated with our news organization to about 15 or so different polling locations in Dorchester, Mattapan, and Roxbury on Tuesday evening to get take the temperature, get some early numbers. And we like to do that in each election. We make it a habit of doing that. But this year we actually deployed more resources into that deliberately. We did anticipate that there'd be some delay happening in the overall city returns getting published online. We didn't realize it would be as delayed as it was, but as it ended up, we had most of the first numbers that were publicly available came through our reporting. So I'm happy that we did it. What we saw from those numbers, because we were focused on the Dorchester side of things, we got a mix. We could see early on that Annissa Essaibi George was doing very well in her base along the Dorchester Avenue corridor. Essentially, she's a citywide councilor, but that part of Dorchester certainly is where where she's from. It's really the heartland for her vote. Places like Florian Hall in 1612, bellwether precincts there, 16, 12, and 11. She was getting easily 80% of the vote there. Places like the Adams Street Library, others along that Dorchester Ave corridor were pretty strong for Annissa, and that was an early indicator that she was going to have a good night. We could also see, by the way, places where Kim Janey or Andrea Campbell were doing well, but they were much smaller margins for those two women who really needed to produce high numbers in places like Mildred Ave Community Center in Mattapan, where we had a reporter there watching the numbers come out. We saw that similar things in Cobman Square. You could see that they were doing far better than Annissa Essaibi George, but not well enough to run up the kind of numbers they need to get into the top two. So that's the kind of things we noticed early on. Of course, Michelle Wu was competitive across the city and was especially strong elsewhere in her bases of like Roslindale, Jamaica Plain, where she really ran up big margins too. Michelle Wu is a citywide candidate, has been for a while, tops the ticket routinely as an at-large councilor. So not a big surprise to see her in the #1 slot, although credit goes to her and her team for doing that. It's running for mayor, you get one vote, and she proved that she can do that on Tuesday. So that's the sum of what we saw. And then on the at-large side, again, we could see real strength for candidates like Michael Flaherty, Erin Murphy, who really ran up big numbers in more moderate to conservative precincts in Dorchester. Didn't do as well in Black neighborhoods, communities of color, but ran up big margins that helped propel those two candidates into the top 4. We saw Julia Mejia do very, very well across the board. And in fact, Julia Mejia overperformed, I thought, based on what I thought going in. She surprised a lot of people with strength in moderate precincts as well as progressive ones. So she did quite well, coming in a very strong 2 on Tuesday night. And then, of course, another big story, Ruth C. Louise Nguyen, who's a Haitian-American attorney, grew up in Mattapan, first-time candidate, really did very well across the city, including in Dorchester and Mattapan. So she ended up in the 3rd spot, quite a good performance for her.
I want to ask you about the dynamic in the mayor's race, because a lot of what you described for Essaibi George and Andrea Campbell and Kim Janey, some of that is territorial, the hometown support, as it were. But, this is a race for mayor in the preliminary where you had all these progressives bunched up along their end of the spectrum. And there was Essaibi George, not a total conservative, but I think she was setting herself apart in some ways. Do you have that? Did you have that feeling?
Oh, definitely. Annissa, and to her credit and her team's credit, I thought ran a really strong campaign, very smart campaign in the preliminary. They carved out a lane and they stuck to it. They drilled it home. They picked up a lot of low-hanging fruit of voters who just didn't have a home. They didn't have a candidate until she made the case as more of a moderate tone, certainly on things like policing, public safety, um, uh, development and housing. She's certainly tracking more to center and even center right on some of those issues in the context of Boston, at least. It's all relative. But Annissa clearly got that lane nailed on Tuesday. The turnout, I think, helped her as well. It was more of a traditional voter, meaning mainly white and moderate conservative vote that predominated on Tuesday. You know, that's going to change in the general election, likely. And I suspect that the tone and the content of both Michelle Wu and Annissa Essaibi George's campaigns are going to shift a bit. Not completely, but there's going to have to be some nuanced changes for both to pick up that 45% of the vote that they didn't get on Tuesday. And those are mainly Black voters, not just Black voters, but they're people who voted for Kim Janey, Andrea Campbell, and John Barros on Tuesday. That's going to be those are going to be the deciding votes, the swing vote, if you will, on November 2nd. So what I would look for next is for, you know, a change in tone, probably, you know, a nuanced change, but certainly both of these candidates need to now make that appeal, make their case to those voters who didn't vote for them on Tuesday.
Tone can mean the left versus right spectrum, but it can also mean the tenor of the campaign as well. You know, when I think back to Jim Brett running against Tom Menino in 1993, another finalist from Dorchester, that was a rather genteel affair, if I recall. But here it is, you know, day one after the election, a PAC comes out with a negative ad against Wu. And I'm thinking, you know, nowadays there are projections in behalf of candidates that people would have maybe refrained from in a different era.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. And there's already been something on the order of $3 million spent by super PACs in this race right now. And there's going to be a big sum coming for this general. Both Michelle Wu and Annissa Essaibi George have super PACs, you know, that are working independent of them to try to get them elected. Michelle Wu's interests are more focused on things like the environment, climate change, you know, sort of left-leaning progressive interests. And so far, Annissa Essaibi George's super PACs seem to be motivated in somewhat in an anti-Wu sort of way, because they don't like her policies on housing, for instance, or public safety. I think what we're going to see with this latest super PAC that started, you know, airing an anti-Wu commercial this week right away, they seem to be animated by development issues, interests that they don't think Wu will be supportive of. So it's going to be interesting. You know, Annissa Essaibi George has already said she wasn't happy with the source of the first ads that ran for her, which by a super PAC chaired by former Boston Police Commissioner Willie Gross. The one of the companies involved in producing that content for the ads has done work for Donald Trump and other, you know, very conservative Republicans. She didn't like that association. She let us know that in reporting that we did, that Gin Dumchus did for the Reporter. So, but, you know, it's a tricky thing because obviously these candidates benefit in some way from getting extra airtime, you know, other commercials, either attacking their opponents or promoting them. But there can be also the problem of they don't control those ads, or they're not supposed to. They're not supposed to have any affiliation with these super PACs, and we take them at their word that they don't. So these super PACs can sometimes run amok, go off message from what the campaign would like, and they don't really have much control over that, other than to speak out and say that they don't like what they're doing. We'll see if they do that going forward.
Well, whether it's from the PACs or the candidates, what I see here is a kind of polarization in the atmosphere, insider versus outsider. What do you think that means for these two candidates going forward when they're looking to expand their base of support? Who has the most potential to expand?
Well, I think at first blush, it's probably Wu, because the progressive people who lost on Tuesday are probably more aligned with her interests, with her policies and demographics. But you know, it remains to be seen. Annissa Essaibi George has a compelling story too, as a daughter of immigrants to the country, as a Dorchester-born and raised person. There's a lane for her too that she needs to expand. I think it's a little bit more difficult for her probably because the candidates that lost on Tuesday, that came up short, tend to be more aligned with Wu's policies and narrative and demographics. So I'd give it advantage Wu to begin with, but again, remains to be seen. And there's plenty of room here for people to make mistakes, go off message, maybe alienate voters that they wish they could get. Both women have their work cut out for them, but I will say both are very capable campaigners, as we've seen. At-large city councilors know how to speak to diverse constituencies. They know how to go to one part of the city and make an appeal and then do the same thing in a different part of the city. They have to be in concert, and if they're not, they get in trouble. So these two women know what they're doing when it comes to that sort of campaigning, and we'll see if they're disciplined enough to keep their teams on that same trajectory.
One thing I'll credit both of them for is they have a lot of experience with relating to different parts of the city. I want to talk more parochially right now, though. You had a race for a seat being left open in District 4 in the City Council, parts of Dorchester and Mattapan, that was held by Andrea Campbell. How did that turn out?
Yeah, District 4 is a vacancy because Andrea Campbell decided to run for mayor and left that seat open. So the top vote getter on Tuesday, Chris, was Brian Worrell, first-time candidate. He did pretty well. He got 25% of the vote in a 9-person race. That's pretty good. He racked up pretty good totals in places like Cobman Square. He did well in Lower Mills, where Andrea Campbell's base has been, on the Mattapan line, Dorchester-Mattapan line. This is a seat that includes parts of Mattapan, parts of Dorchester, and parts of Roslindale as well. He did pretty well across the board. He didn't win all the precincts. Avandro Carvalho, who's the #2 finisher, the former state representative, so not a newbie here. He knows what he's doing too. He came in second place, though, which I think was a little disappointing for his team. They were, I think, a little surprised by the strength of Brian Worrell. Worrell has pretty deep roots in this district. He comes from a very active family. It showed. He did quite well. And I think, going into the general election, he's got to be considered the favorite given, the vote total he put up, over 2,000 votes. But, Avandro Carvalho has also proven that he can win elections in the past, winning in the 5th Suffolk district. There's been some crossover for him with those precincts. He's going to have to step up his game to catch up with Worrell, but that's going to be an interesting race to watch on November 2nd.
A little bit of time here about Roxbury's District 7. Tanya Anderson came in first, but the second place candidate, it looks as if it's going to be a perennial candidate, Roy Owens, but then again, maybe not. What do you know?
Well, it's true. Roy Owens presently is in second place and is the presumed second place winner. He's going to go on to the general election unless Angie Camacho, who's the third place finisher, she finished just 25 votes, I believe, 27 votes maybe, behind Roy Owens, who, as you mentioned, perennial candidate. He was actually on the ballot for at-large as well, because you could do that. He runs for everything, literally. He's run against Diana Presley. He's run for literally every office that he could in the city, and usually always has lost. I think he will lose again in November, no matter who he faces. But the fact that he came in second was a surprise, honestly. There were several other candidates in this race who we thought were probably going to be stronger and end up in the final against Tanya Fernandez Anderson. As you mentioned, she won clearly. She was way ahead of Roy Owens. But if there is a recount, and Angie Camacho has suggested that she will possibly seek one, she's got to make up 27 votes, I think. We'll see if that can happen. But otherwise, it is going to be Anderson against Owens for District 7. And of course, that's the seat left vacant by Kim Janey.
Bill, I know you always have more things coming out on the feed. So if people want to keep track of what's going on in Dorchester or city politics, what's the best way?
Yeah, come find us. We welcome everyone at .news.com. That's our website. And also you can follow us on Twitter. .news is our Twitter handle. You can follow me at Bill Forry. And of course, we're still in print all over the neighborhoods in Dorchester, Mattapan in particular. You can find us at your local newsstand as well.